Before we dive into one of the most extraordinary stories of talent, perseverance, and unexpected opportunity you'll ever hear, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. Stories like this one remind us that magic still exists in our world, and you won't want to miss a single one. Every weekday morning at exactly 7:30, Isabella Martinez would position herself at the corner of 5th Avenue and Broadway in downtown Portland, Oregon. Her setup was simple but carefully arranged: a weathered acoustic guitar that had seen better days, a small amplifier powered by a portable battery, and an open guitar case lined with velvet that had faded from deep purple to a gentle lavender over the years. At 3 feet 9 inches tall, Isabella had to adjust her positioning carefully to ensure her voice would carry over the morning rush hour noise, but once she began to sing, everything else seemed to fade into the background. Isabella possessed something that couldn't be taught, bought, or manufactured: a voice that could stop strangers in their tracks and make them forget, for just a moment, about their deadlines, their problems, and their hurried lives. Her voice was rich and powerful, with a tone that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her small frame should have been able to produce. When she sang, passers-by would slow their pace, some would stop entirely, and a few would linger long enough to drop coins or bills into her guitar case, often with expressions of genuine amazement on their faces. The corner of 5th and Broadway had become Isabella's stage through necessity rather than choice. After years of auditions that ended with polite rejections and vague excuses about not being the right fit, she had learned that the music industry often struggled to see past physical appearances to recognize true talent. Record labels wanted artists who fit specific images, venues preferred performers who matched their aesthetic expectations, and talent agents seemed more interested in marketability than in actual musical ability. But the street didn't care about any of that. On the street, talent spoke for itself. Isabella's repertoire was carefully curated to showcase the incredible range and versatility of her voice. She could transition seamlessly from soulful jazz standards that would make Billie Holiday proud to contemporary pop songs that resonated with younger passers-by, then shift into classical pieces that demonstrated her formal training and technical mastery. She had studied music at Portland State University, earning her degree in vocal performance while working multiple part-time jobs to pay for her education. Her professors had recognized her exceptional talent, but the transition from academic success to professional opportunity had proven far more challenging than she had anticipated. The morning routine had become a meditation for Isabella. She would arrive at her corner before the breakfast crowds emerged, tune her guitar with the precision of a concert musician, and warm up her voice with scales and exercises that echoed off the surrounding buildings. The early commuters knew to expect her, and many had become regular contributors to her guitar case. There was James, the business executive who always dropped a $5 bill and requested "Somewhere Over the Rainbow" every Tuesday. There was Mrs. Kim, the elderly shop owner who would bring Isabella coffee and a pastry on particularly cold mornings. There was Sarah, the college student who often stopped to chat about music theory and songwriting techniques. But for every person who appreciated Isabella's talent, there were others who seemed to see only her stature. She had grown accustomed to the stares, the whispered comments, and the occasional cruel remarks from people who seemed to think her presence on the street corner was somehow entertainment rather than serious artistic expression. Isabella had developed a thick skin over the years, learning to focus on the music and the people who truly heard what she was offering rather than letting the negativity diminish her passion. The financial reality of street performing was harsh and unpredictable. On good days, Isabella might collect enough to cover her basic expenses and perhaps save a small amount toward her dream of recording a professional album. On bad days, when the weather was poor or the crowds were sparse, she barely made enough to justify the time spent. She supplemented her street performance income with voice lessons given in her small studio apartment, teaching children and adults who were drawn to her patient teaching style and obvious expertise. These students often became her most loyal fans, bringing their families to hear her perform and spreading word about her remarkable talent. Isabella's apartment was a testament to her dedication to her craft. The living room had been converted into a music studio, with professional microphones, recording equipment she had saved for years to purchase, and walls lined with sheet music for hundreds of songs. She spent hours each day practicing, writing original compositions, and creating arrangements that would showcase her voice in new and interesting ways. The neighbors had initially complained about the noise, but over time, most had come to appreciate having a world-class vocalist living in their building. Despite the challenges and disappointments, Isabella had never considered giving up on music. It wasn't just her career, it was her calling, her identity, and her way of connecting with the world. She believed deeply that music had the power to heal, to inspire, and to bring people together across all boundaries. Every day on that street corner was another opportunity to share that belief with anyone willing to listen. The irony wasn't lost on Isabella that some of the world's greatest musicians had started as street performers. Bob Dylan, Tracy Chapman, and Jewel had all buskied before achieving fame and recognition. She often reminded herself that every no from the industry was simply redirecting her toward the path she was meant to take. Perhaps her journey would be different from the traditional route, but that didn't make it any less valid or valuable. What Isabella didn't know was that her daily performances had been noticed by someone with the power to change everything. Someone who had been watching from a distance, impressed not just by her vocal ability but by her professionalism, her resilience, and her unwavering commitment to excellence despite performing in less than ideal circumstances. Someone who understood that true talent deserved a proper platform, regardless of the package it came in. On this particular Tuesday morning in March, as Isabella tuned her guitar and prepared for another day of sharing her gift with the world, she had no idea that her life was about to change in ways she had never dared to imagine. The stage she had been preparing for her entire life was finally ready for her, and the person who would provide it was about to make himself known. The morning started like any other, with Isabella arriving at her corner just as the first wave of commuters began making their way to work. She had chosen to open with Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen, a song that never failed to capture attention with its haunting melody and her powerful interpretation. As her voice soared over the city noise, weaving through the lyrics with an emotional depth that seemed impossible from someone performing on a street corner, the usual small crowd began to gather. What Isabella didn't notice immediately was the man in the expensive charcoal suit who had stopped about 20 feet away, partially hidden behind a newspaper stand. Richard Blackwood was not accustomed to being on the streets at this hour, preferring to travel by private car directly to his downtown office where he served as CEO of Harmony Entertainment, one of the largest independent record labels on the West Coast. But this morning, his driver had been delayed, and Richard had decided to walk the few blocks from his hotel to clear his head before an important board meeting. Richard had built his fortune by recognizing talent that others overlooked. Over the past 15 years, he had signed artists who had been rejected by major labels, and many of them had gone on to achieve both critical acclaim and commercial success. He had an ear for authenticity, for voices that carried genuine emotion rather than manufactured polish. But even with his experienced perspective, he was completely unprepared for what he was hearing from the small woman with the guitar. Isabella's voice possessed a quality that Richard had only encountered a handful of times in his career. It wasn't just technically proficient, though her control and range were obviously exceptional. It wasn't just emotionally resonant, though she could convey heartbreak and hope with equal power. There was something indefinable about her performance, a presence that commanded attention and respect from everyone within earshot. Richard found himself completely absorbed, forgetting about his meeting, his schedule, and everything else except the extraordinary talent performing just yards away from him. As Isabella transitioned into Amazing Grace, Richard noticed how she had adapted the spiritual to showcase different aspects of her vocal ability. The first verse was delivered with quiet reverence, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly to every listener. The second verse built in power and complexity, with vocal runs that demonstrated her technical mastery. By the final verse, she was singing with the full force of her voice, a sound so rich and powerful that it seemed to resonate in the chests of everyone present. The crowd had grown larger than usual, with people pulling out their phones to record the performance. Richard observed the faces around him, businesspeople who had stopped despite being late for work, tourists who had stumbled upon something far more authentic than any planned attraction, and local residents who seemed to know they were witnessing something special. More importantly, he watched Isabella herself, noting her complete professionalism despite the informal setting, her genuine connection with her audience, and her obvious joy in sharing her gift. When the song ended, the applause was enthusiastic and sustained, with several people stepping forward to drop bills into Isabella's guitar case. Richard heard one woman tell her companion, "I've never heard anything like that in my life," and a businessman say into his phone, "You need to get down here right now, there's a woman singing on Fifth Avenue who's absolutely incredible. Richard approached slowly, not wanting to interrupt as Isabella thanked her audience and prepared for her next song. He noticed the professional quality of her equipment despite its worn appearance, the careful way she positioned herself for optimal acoustics, and the genuine warmth with which she interacted with regular supporters who stopped to chat. Everything about her performance demonstrated that this wasn't a hobby or a temporary situation. This was a serious artist making the best of limited opportunities. "Excuse me," Richard said quietly as the crowd began to disperse. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I had to tell you that what I just heard was absolutely extraordinary." Isabella looked up with a polite smile she reserved for complimentary strangers, but something in Richard's tone made her pause. He wasn't offering the casual praise she typically received. There was a gravity to his words that suggested deeper appreciation. "Thank you so much," she replied. "That means a lot, especially this early in the morning. Most people are just trying to get to work and don't have time to really listen." "I can imagine," Richard said, glancing around at the bustling street. "But I have to ask, have you ever considered recording professionally? Because with a voice like yours, you should be performing in concert halls, not on street corners." Isabella's expression shifted slightly, and Richard caught a glimpse of the disappointment and frustration she usually kept hidden. "I've tried the traditional routes," she said carefully. "Let's just say the music industry has very specific ideas about what a successful artist should look like." Richard felt a familiar anger rising in his chest, the same frustration he'd experienced countless times when discussing the industry's narrow-minded approach to talent. "Their loss," he said firmly. "And potentially everyone else's gain, if the right opportunity came along." There was something in the way he spoke that made Isabella study his face more carefully. This wasn't the casual encouragement she sometimes received from well-meaning passers-by. There was authority in his voice, experience in his assessment, and what sounded suspiciously like genuine interest in his questions. "Are you in the music business?" Isabella asked, setting down her guitar and giving him her full attention. Richard smiled and reached into his jacket pocket, withdrawing a business card that Isabella accepted with slightly trembling fingers. As she read the embossed text, "Richard Blackwood, CEO, Harmony Entertainment," her eyes widened with recognition. "You're kidding me," she whispered, looking from the card to his face and back again. "You're Richard Blackwood? You discovered Sarah Chen, Marcus Williams, the Riverside Quartet." "Among others," Richard confirmed. "And right now, I'm standing here thinking I might have just discovered the most talented vocalist I've heard in the past 5 years." Isabella felt her heart racing, but years of disappointment had taught her to be cautious about moments that seemed too good to be true. "Mr. Blackwood, I appreciate the compliment, I really do. But I've been through this before. People say they're interested, they promise meetings that never happen, or they schedule auditions that end with polite rejections. I've learned not to get my hopes up." Richard understood her skepticism completely. He'd seen too many artists burned by false promises and industry politics. "I understand your caution, and frankly, it speaks well of your experience and intelligence. But here's what I'd like to propose. Tomorrow morning, I'd like you to come to my office, not for an audition, but for a conversation. I want to hear your story, understand your musical background, and discuss what a partnership with Harmony Entertainment might look like." He paused, watching her expression carefully. "And I want you to know that this conversation is happening because of what I heard here today, not despite where I heard it. Street performance takes courage, authenticity, and real talent. Those are exactly the qualities I look for in artists." Isabella stared at the business card in her hands, reading it again to make sure she hadn't misunderstood. Harmony Entertainment was exactly the kind of label she had dreamed of working with. Independent enough to take creative risks, but established enough to provide real opportunities for their artists. Richard Blackwood's reputation in the industry was impeccable. He was known for developing artists rather than simply exploiting them, for valuing artistic integrity over quick profits. "You're serious about this," Isabella said, more as a statement than a question. "Completely serious," Richard replied. "I'll be honest with you, I came down this street by accident this morning. I was supposed to be in a car, heading to a meeting about quarterly projections and market positioning. Instead, I found myself listening to someone who reminded me why I got into this business in the first place. That's not a coincidence I'm willing to ignore. Isabella felt tears threatening to well up in her eyes, but she forced herself to maintain her composure. What would this conversation involve? I mean, what would you need to know? Everything, Richard said simply. Your musical background, your influences, your goals, your concerns about the industry. I want to understand who you are as an artist and as a person. I want to hear more of your music, see what you've written, learn about your creative process. And I want to explain how Harmony Entertainment works, what we could offer you, and what a recording contract with us would actually mean. He glanced at his watch and realized he was now significantly late for his board meeting, but found that he didn't care at all. Look, I know this is a lot to process, and I don't want to pressure you into anything. Take the evening to think about it. If you decide you're interested, call my assistant tomorrow morning and she'll set up a time that works for you. Isabella nodded, still clutching the business card. Mr. Blackwood, can I ask you something? Of course. In your experience, do you think the industry is changing? I mean, do you think there's really room for artists who don't fit the traditional mold? Richard's expression grew thoughtful. I think the industry is being forced to change, whether it wants to or not. Audiences are becoming more sophisticated, more interested in authenticity than in manufactured perfection. The old gatekeepers are losing their power, and talent is finding new ways to reach people directly. But more importantly, I think there are still people in this business who care more about music than about marketing demographics. He extended his hand to shake hers. I hope I'll have the chance to prove that to you. As Richard walked away, disappearing into the crowd of morning commuters, Isabella stood frozen for several minutes, still holding his business card. The familiar sounds of the city continued around her, car horns, footsteps, fragments of conversation, but everything felt different now. The corner that had been her stage for years suddenly felt like a launching pad, and the future that had seemed so limited just an hour ago now sparkled with possibility. Isabella spent the rest of that Tuesday in a state of disbelief, replaying every moment of her encounter with Richard Blackwood until she was certain she must have imagined the entire conversation. She performed for the remainder of the morning, but her heart wasn't entirely in it. Her mind kept drifting to the business card tucked safely in her guitar case and the possibility that her life might be about to change in ways she had never dared to hope for. That evening, Isabella sat in her small apartment, surrounded by her musical equipment and stacks of original compositions, staring at Richard's business card for the 100th time. She had spent hours researching Harmony Entertainment online, reading about their roster of artists, their approach to artist development, and Richard's own background in the music industry. Everything she discovered only reinforced her initial impression. This was exactly the kind of label she had dreamed of working with, and Richard Blackwood was exactly the kind of industry professional who might actually see her talent rather than just her physical appearance. The next morning, Isabella called Harmony Entertainment's main number with trembling fingers. Richard's assistant, a warm-voiced woman named Patricia, seemed to be expecting her call and immediately offered her a meeting time that same afternoon. Mr. Blackwood cleared his entire schedule, Patricia explained. He said this was the most important meeting he'd have all week. Isabella arrived at the Harmony Entertainment offices 30 minutes early, despite her best efforts to time her arrival perfectly. The building was modern but welcoming, with gold records lining the walls and comfortable seating areas where she could see other artists and industry professionals having animated conversations about music and creativity. The atmosphere was so different from the sterile, intimidating environments she had encountered at major labels that she began to feel cautiously optimistic about what lay ahead. When Patricia led her into Richard's office, Isabella was struck immediately by how personal and lived in the space felt. Instead of the typical executive setup with an imposing desk creating distance between him and his visitors, Richard had arranged comfortable chairs around a coffee table, with guitars mounted on the walls and shelves filled with vinyl records and music memorabilia. Richard himself was dressed more casually than he had been the previous morning, and his entire demeanor conveyed genuine enthusiasm rather than business formality. "Isabella, thank you so much for coming," Richard said, rising to greet her with a warm handshake. I have to admit, I've been looking forward to this conversation since yesterday morning. Can I get you anything to drink? Coffee, tea, water. As they settled into the comfortable chairs, Richard pulled out a legal pad covered with handwritten notes. I hope you don't mind, but I did some research after we met. I found several videos online of your street performances, and I have to say, hearing you through my office speakers only confirmed what I experienced in person. Your voice is absolutely remarkable. Isabella felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with excitement. I had no idea people were recording my performances and posting them online. Oh yes, quite a few people have. There's one video from last Christmas where you sang Silent Night that has over 50,000 views. The comments are incredible. People calling you the best street performer they've ever heard, asking if you have albums they can buy, wondering why you're not famous already. Richard leaned forward slightly. That last question is exactly what I'd like to discuss with you today. Over the next hour, Richard asked Isabella about her musical background, her training, her influences, and her experiences with the music industry. Isabella found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected, sharing not just the technical details of her education and experience, but also the emotional journey of pursuing a career in an industry that often seemed determined to exclude her. The thing that frustrates me most, Isabella admitted, is that I know I have the talent and the training to succeed. I've been told by professors, by other musicians, even by people in the industry that my voice is exceptional. But when it comes to actual opportunities, there's always some reason why I'm not quite right for what they're looking for. Richard nodded thoughtfully. I've seen that pattern too many times, and it's one of the reasons I started Harmony Entertainment. The major labels have become so focused on marketability and image that they're missing incredible talent. They're looking for artists who fit predetermined molds rather than artists who can create their own unique space in the market. He stood up and walked to a shelf lined with framed photographs of Harmony Entertainment artists performing in venues ranging from intimate clubs to major concert halls. Every artist we've signed has been told by someone else that they weren't commercial enough, weren't the right look, weren't what the market wanted. And yet, every single one of them has found their audience and built successful careers by being authentically themselves. Richard returned to his seat and looked directly at Isabella. Here's what I'd like to propose. I want to offer you a recording contract with Harmony Entertainment. Not a development deal, not a demo arrangement, but a full recording contract with our complete support for your first album. Isabella felt her breath catch in her throat. After years of disappointment and rejection, the words she had longed to hear seemed almost surreal. But before you respond, Richard continued, I want you to understand exactly what this would involve and what our expectations would be. First, we would want you to record an album that showcases the full range of your abilities. Based on what I've heard, I think you have the versatility to appeal to multiple audiences: jazz lovers, pop fans, classical music enthusiasts. We'd work with you to create an album that honors all of those influences while establishing your unique artistic identity. He pulled out a folder containing detailed information about the proposed contract terms. Financially, we're prepared to offer you a significant advance that would allow you to focus entirely on your music. We'd also cover all recording costs, marketing expenses, and provide you with a full support team including a producer, sound engineers, and marketing professionals who specialize in launching new artists. Isabella stared at the contract outline, hardly believing what she was reading. The advance alone was more money than she typically made in 2 years of street performing and voice lessons combined. The timeline would be flexible but focused, Richard explained. We'd want to get you into the studio within the next month to begin recording, with a goal of releasing your first single in about 6 months and the full album within a year. We'd also book you for live performances, not street corners, but real venues where your talent can be properly showcased and appreciated. Isabella felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, but she forced herself to maintain her composure. Mr. Blackwood, this is incredible, but I have to ask, why me? You could sign any number of established artists or people with industry connections. Why take a chance on a street performer? Richard smiled, and Isabella could see the genuine passion for music that had driven his entire career. Because in 15 years of running this label, I've learned that the most successful artists are the ones who have something real to say and the talent to say it compellingly. You've been honing your craft not in comfortable studios or with industry support, but in the most challenging environment possible. On the street, where every day you have to prove your worth to complete strangers who owe you nothing. He gestured toward the window, in the direction of downtown Portland. Do you know how many people walk past street performers every day without stopping? Do you know how rare it is for someone to build the kind of following you have, where people actively seek out your performances and bring their friends to hear you? That's not luck, Isabella. That's talent, authenticity, and the kind of genuine connection with audiences that most artists spend their entire careers trying to achieve. Richard leaned back in his chair, his expression growing more serious. I'm not offering you this contract because I feel sorry for you or because I want to be charitable. I'm offering it because I believe you have the potential to be one of the most successful artists Harmony Entertainment has ever signed. I think your first album could be something truly special, and I think audiences are ready for an artist like you. Isabella took a deep breath, trying to process everything she had heard. What would you need from me right now? Just your signature on this letter of intent, Richard said, sliding a single page across the table. This isn't the full contract. That will take a few days for our lawyers to prepare based on the terms we've discussed. But this would formalize our agreement to move forward and allow us to begin the pre-production process. Isabella picked up the letter and read through it carefully. Everything was exactly as Richard had described: the financial terms, the creative control provisions, the timeline for recording and release. At the bottom was a line for her signature that would transform her from a street performer into a professional recording artist. Mr. Blackwood, before I sign this, I need you to know something. I'm not going to change who I am or compromise my artistic vision to fit someone else's idea of what I should be. I've spent too many years being told I need to be different, and I won't do that anymore. Richard's smile was immediate and genuine. Isabella, if I wanted you to be someone else, I would have signed someone else. I want you to be exactly who you are, because who you are is extraordinary. Isabella signed the letter of intent with a hand that trembled slightly from excitement rather than fear. As her pen moved across the paper, she felt as though she was not just signing a contract, but stepping through a doorway into a completely different life. The street corner that had been her stage for so many years suddenly felt like a distant memory, even though it had been less than 24 hours since her last performance there. The weeks that followed moved with a speed that left Isabella breathless but exhilarated. Richard had meant it when he said Harmony Entertainment would provide complete support. Within days, she found herself working with a team of professionals who treated her not as a novelty or a charity case, but as a serious artist whose success was their primary objective. The producer Richard assigned to her project was Maria Santos, a Grammy-nominated musician who had worked with some of the biggest names in contemporary music, and who immediately understood Isabella's vision for her sound. The first thing we need to do, Maria explained during their initial meeting at the studio, is forget everything the industry has told you about what you should sound like or who you should be. I've listened to hours of your street performances, and what makes you special is your authenticity. Our job is to capture that and present it in the highest quality possible. The recording studio itself was unlike anything Isabella had ever experienced. Located in a converted warehouse in Portland's Arts District, Harmony Entertainment's facility was equipped with state-of-the-art technology while maintaining the warm, creative atmosphere that Richard insisted was essential for artistic expression. The main recording room had perfect acoustics, professional lighting that could be adjusted to create different moods, and enough space for a full band if needed. But what impressed Isabella most was how the team approached her music. Instead of trying to fit her voice into existing commercial categories, Maria and the sound engineers worked to understand the unique qualities that made Isabella's performances so compelling. They experimented with different microphone techniques to capture the full richness of her tone, tested various instrumental arrangements to complement rather than overshadow her vocals, and spent hours discussing the emotional journey they wanted the album to take listeners on. Your voice has this incredible ability to make people feel like you're singing directly to them, Maria observed during one of their recording sessions. Even in a crowded street, people stopped because they felt that personal connection. We need to make sure that intimacy comes through even when someone is listening to your album alone in their car or through headphones. The song selection process revealed the depth and breadth of Isabella's musical knowledge. She had prepared dozens of potential tracks, ranging from her own original compositions to carefully chosen covers that would showcase different aspects of her vocal ability. Together with Maria, they narrowed the list down to 12 songs that would tell a cohesive story while demonstrating Isabella's versatility. The album would open with "Begin Again," an original song Isabella had written about finding hope after disappointment. The lyrics drew from her own experiences with industry rejection, but the message was universal enough to resonate with anyone who had ever faced setbacks in pursuing their dreams. Her voice on the recording was powerful yet vulnerable, conveying both the pain of past failures and the excitement of new possibilities. The middle section of the album featured Isabella's interpretations of classic songs that had inspired her musical development. Her version of "Summertime" was sultry and sophisticated, showcasing her jazz influences while adding contemporary elements that made the song feel fresh. Her take on "Bridge Over Troubled Water" was emotionally devastating, with her voice building from a whisper to a soaring crescendo that left everyone in the studio with tears in their eyes. But perhaps the most powerful track was "Small Stage, Big Dreams," another original composition that directly addressed her experience as a street performer. The song was both a love letter to the people who had stopped to listen over the years and a declaration of her intention to reach even larger audiences with her music. The recording featured just Isabella's voice and a piano, allowing every nuance of her performance to shine through. As the recording sessions progressed, Isabella found herself growing not just as a vocalist but as a complete artist. Maria encouraged her to be involved in every aspect of the production process, from selecting which takes to use to deciding on the final mix. Isabella learned about sound engineering, studied how different instruments could complement her voice, and developed a deeper understanding of how to translate her artistic vision into a finished product. The transformation wasn't just professional, it was personal as well. For the first time in years, Isabella felt truly valued for her talents rather than limited by others' perceptions of her physical appearance. The team at Harmony Entertainment treated her as an equal collaborator, asking for her input on creative decisions and respecting her artistic instincts. She discovered that she had strong opinions about her music and the confidence to express them. "You know what I love about working with you?" Maria said one afternoon as they listened to playback of a particularly challenging vocal arrangement. "You never second-guess yourself, artistically. You know exactly what you want your music to say and how you want it to sound. That's incredibly rare, even among established artists." The marketing team was equally impressive, developing a campaign strategy that focused on Isabella's music rather than her personal story. While they didn't ignore her journey from street performer to recording artist, they made sure that her talent remained the central focus of all promotional materials. The first professional photos taken of Isabella showed her in the recording studio, surrounded by the instruments and equipment that were helping her create her art. "We want people to hear your music first," explained Jennifer Walsh, Harmony Entertainment's marketing director. "When they fall in love with your voice, when they connect with your songs, then they'll be interested in learning more about your story. But the music has to come first, always." The photo shoots and promotional videos were unlike anything Isabella had ever experienced. Instead of trying to make her look like someone else, the creative team worked to capture her authentic self. The images showed her confidence, her joy in making music, and her genuine personality. For the first time, Isabella saw herself represented in professional media as she truly was, a talented, dedicated artist who happened to be a person with dwarfism, rather than a person with dwarfism who happened to sing. 3 months after signing her contract, Isabella held the finished master recording of her debut album, Street Corner Symphony, in her hands. The title reflected both her origins as a street performer and her vision for her music. Complex, layered, and emotionally rich compositions that could move audiences just as powerfully in concert halls as they had on busy sidewalks. Richard invited Isabella to his office to hear the final album in its entirety on the studio's high-end sound system. As her voice filled the room, bringing to life songs that had existed only in her imagination just months before, Isabella felt a sense of accomplishment that was deeper and more satisfying than anything she had ever experienced. "This is just the beginning," Richard said as the final notes of the album faded away. "We've created something truly special here, but now comes the fun part, sharing it with the world." The first single, "Begin Again," was scheduled for release in 2 weeks, followed by Isabella's first official music video and her debut performance at Portland's renowned Crystal Ballroom. After years of performing for whoever happened to walk by, Isabella was about to step onto a real stage, in front of an audience that had specifically come to hear her music. As she prepared to leave Richard's office that day, Isabella paused to look at the wall of photographs showing Harmony Entertainment's artists performing in venues around the world. Soon, her own photograph would join that collection, representing not just her personal success but proof that talent and determination could overcome any obstacle the industry might place in front of an artist. The night of Isabella's debut performance at the Crystal Ballroom arrived with a mixture of excitement and nervous energy that she had never experienced before. This wasn't just another gig or even just the launch of her recording career, it was the culmination of everything she had worked toward her entire life. As she stood backstage, listening to the sold-out crowd of 800 people chatting and laughing in anticipation, Isabella realized that she was about to step onto the stage she had always deserved but never dared to believe she would reach. The venue itself was perfect for her debut. The Crystal Ballroom was an intimate space with exceptional acoustics, known for hosting both established stars and emerging artists who were considered the future of music. The audience that night was diverse, including industry professionals, music journalists, longtime fans who had discovered her through her street performances, and newcomers who had been drawn by the buzz surrounding her upcoming album release. Richard had insisted on keeping the guest list relatively small and exclusive, wanting Isabella's first major performance to feel special rather than overwhelming. "This night isn't about proving anything to anyone," he had told her during their final preparation meeting. "It's about celebrating what you've already accomplished and sharing your gift with people who are here specifically to hear your music." As Isabella made her final preparations backstage, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. Just 6 months ago, she had been singing on street corners, hoping that passers-by might pause long enough to appreciate her talent. Tonight, every single person in the audience had specifically chosen to be here, had purchased tickets weeks in advance, and was waiting eagerly to hear what she had to say through her music. The stage setup was elegant in its simplicity. A grand piano, carefully positioned spotlights, and state-of-the-art sound equipment that would ensure every nuance of her voice reached every corner of the ballroom. Isabella had rehearsed on this stage the previous afternoon, working with the sound engineers to perfect the acoustics and familiarize herself with the space. But standing here now, minutes before her entrance, everything felt different. Maria Santos appeared beside her, carrying the guitar that Isabella would use for several songs in her set. "You ready for this?" Maria asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. "I've been ready for this my entire life," Isabella replied, and she meant it completely. All the years of training, street performing, rejection, and persistence had been preparing her for this moment. The introduction was brief and heartfelt. Richard took the stage to welcome the audience and provide just enough context about Isabella's journey to make her appearance meaningful without overshadowing her talent. "Ladies and gentlemen," he concluded, "please join me in welcoming an artist who proves that extraordinary talent will always find its way to the stage it deserves, Isabella Martinez." The applause was immediate and enthusiastic as Isabella walked onto the stage, but what struck her most was the quality of attention she received. Unlike the scattered, distracted acknowledgement she had grown accustomed to on the street, this audience was completely focused on her, ready to listen with their full attention to whatever she wanted to share. Isabella opened with "Begin Again," the song that had become the first single from her album. As her voice filled the ballroom, clear and powerful and full of emotion, she could see faces in the audience responding to the lyrics, connecting with the message of hope and renewal that had grown from her own experiences. The acoustics were perfect, allowing every subtle inflection and vocal technique to reach the audience exactly as she intended. The set list was carefully crafted to showcase the full range of her abilities while telling the story of her artistic journey. After "Begin Again," she transitioned into her jazz-influenced interpretation of "Summertime," her voice taking on a sultry, sophisticated quality that demonstrated her versatility. The audience was completely silent during the performance, hanging on every note, and the applause when she finished was thunderous. "Thank you," Isabella said, speaking to the audience for the first time. 6 months ago, I was singing these same songs on street corners, hoping that someone might stop and listen. Tonight, I'm looking out at a room full of people who chose to be here, who wanted to hear these songs. That means more to me than I can possibly express. The middle section of her performance featured several original compositions, including Small Stage, Big Dreams, the song that most directly addressed her experience as a street performer. As she sang the lyrics she had written about the people who had stopped to listen over the years, about the dreams that had sustained her through difficult times, Isabella could see audience members wiping away tears. But the most powerful moment of the evening came when Isabella performed her version of Amazing Grace, the same song that had been playing when Richard first heard her on Fifth Avenue. She had arranged it specially for this performance, beginning with just her voice and gradually building to include piano accompaniment. Her voice soared through the familiar melody, but her interpretation made it feel completely fresh and personal. The standing ovation that followed lasted for several minutes, with audience members on their feet applauding not just her vocal ability but the complete artistic experience she had created. Isabella felt tears of joy streaming down her face as she looked out at the crowd, seeing the same expressions of amazement and appreciation that had sustained her through years of uncertainty. "I want to tell you about someone," Isabella said as the applause finally died down. 6 months ago, a man named Richard Blackwood was walking to work when he happened to hear me singing on a street corner. Instead of walking past like most people do, he stopped, he listened, and he believed that my music deserved a bigger stage. Richard, wherever you are in this audience, thank you for seeing what was possible instead of just what was." She gestured toward Richard, who was standing in the back of the ballroom with tears in his eyes, and the audience turned to applaud him as well. But Richard shook his head and pointed back toward Isabella, making it clear that this moment belonged entirely to her. Isabella closed her set with a song she had never performed publicly before, an original composition called The Stage I Deserved. She had written it specifically for this performance, and it served as both a thank you to everyone who had supported her journey and a declaration of her intention to use her platform to lift up other artists who might be struggling to find their own stages. As the final notes faded away and the audience erupted in another standing ovation, Isabella knew that everything had changed. Tomorrow, music journalists would write reviews of her performance. Radio stations would begin playing her single. Music lovers around the country would discover her album and connect with her story. But more importantly, she had proven to herself and to everyone present that talent and determination could overcome any obstacle. The after-party was intimate and joyful, with industry professionals, fellow musicians, and fans celebrating not just Isabella's success but what her story represented. She found herself in conversations with record executives who wanted to discuss collaboration opportunities, with journalists who wanted to understand her creative process, and with other artists who were inspired by her journey. But the moment that meant the most to Isabella came when a young woman with dwarfism approached her with her parents. "I saw videos of you performing on the street," the girl said, "and my mom brought me here tonight because she said I needed to see what was possible. I sing too, and I've always been afraid that people wouldn't take me seriously." Isabella knelt down to the girl's eye level, taking her hands gently. "Don't you ever let anyone make you believe that your dreams are too big," she said. "If you have talent and you're willing to work for it, there's a stage out there waiting for you too." As Isabella drove home that night, past the corner of Fifth Avenue and Broadway where her professional journey had truly begun, she reflected on the incredible transformation her life had undergone. She was no longer a street performer hoping for recognition. She was a recording artist with an album climbing the charts, a growing fan base, and opportunities that seemed to expand every day. The stage she had been given wasn't just the Crystal Ballroom or the recording studio or the radio interviews that were already being scheduled. The stage she deserved was the platform to share her music with the world, to inspire other artists who might be facing similar challenges, and to prove that extraordinary talent could emerge from the most unexpected places. Isabella Martinez had found her stage, and the world was finally ready to listen.